Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today in person and online. I'm excited to be here for this timely discussion about how California can use recent advances in artificial intelligence to be more resilient to both natural and man-made disasters. My name is Sarah Brady. I'm the interim CEO of the California Council on Science and Technology. I'd like to begin our event today by acknowledging California Native American tribes and people have stewarded the lands and waters in what we now call the state of California since time immemorial. We have a lot more work to do to make meaningful reparative changes to address historical wrongs committed against California Native American tribes. And I encourage each of you, as you engage in today's discussion, and as you go out into the world, to elevate tribal governments, communities, and peoples and their priorities in your work. Today, this panel is the kickoff for our 7th annual CCST Science and Technology Week. We are celebrating more than 35 years of making California's policies stronger with science and technology. I hope you'll be able to join us for the different events we have planned this week, including our annual S&T Week reception and Science and Public Service Awards ceremony tomorrow evening, 5 p.m. at the Mix. It's impossible to create science-informed policy without access to a strong network of technical expertise encompassing a spectrum of perspectives and experience. The California Council on Science and Technology is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization established over 35 years ago at the request of the legislature to connect such a network and provide the access and expertise to our state policymakers. We're proud of our track record of amplifying and translating science and technology advice from the wealth of outstanding academic and research institutions in our state directly to policymakers. We have formal partnerships with the University of California, the California State University System, the community colleges, Stanford, Caltech, USC, and the NASA and Department of Energy federal labs and research centers in our state. We are lucky in California to have these incredible experts and have experts from these institutions here with us today. So in 2020, CCST began to focus our efforts on California's resilience to the many complex and cascading disasters our state faces currently this weekend, and that will continue to face in the future. Through our Disaster Resilience Initiative, we seek to deliver science and technology advice to reduce harm and improve the lives of all Californians. A resilient California prepares for, responds swiftly to, and recovers well from natural and man-made disasters. A change that requires us all to think expansively about what resources we have to alert us, assist us, and help us learn to strengthen and improve systems that may be disrupted during disasters. So today, along those lines, we're exploring how artificial intelligence can be harnessed to fortify California's resilience against the myriad of challenges we will face. We're here to foster big ideas, thoughtful discussions, and groundbreaking solutions. To lead us, to kick us off today in this exciting discourse, I'm delighted to welcome GovOps Secretary Amy Tong, whose leaderships and insight will set the stage for our exploration into the intersection of artificial intelligence and disaster resilience. Secretary Tong, appointed by Governor Newsom as Secretary of GovOps in 2022, has charted an extraordinary trajectory in her career, demonstrating unwavering dedication to the people of California. Overseeing an agency with more than 22,000 employees, Secretary Tong has been instrumental in optimizing state operations to deliver top-notch public services. Her portfolio is vast and impactful, ranging from workforce development to technology and innovation, procurement, public employment and teachers' pension systems, and much more. Notably, she is spearheading efforts in generative artificial intelligence within state government, showcasing her commitment to leveraging cutting-edge technology for the benefit of all Californians. Secretary Tong, please join us.
Thank you, Sarah, for that wonderful introduction. I probably should get a copy of that and update my own bio accordingly. I am so thrilled to be here, and I can see many of you. I heard this is also a hybrid event. So for those of you that are joining remotely, great to be here with you all. As Sarah mentioned, that what an uneventful weekend. It's, you cannot have disaster resilience or not to have that on the top of your mind after what we just went through. And for that same reason, right after I kick off this wonderful conversation, I unfortunately have to go join the disaster relief effort that is going on, as the state, under the governor's leadership, has already mobilized the emergency response team. But I do have my colleague here to continue to be part of this conversation, including, I just find out one of our recently retirees, Stu Drown here, also decided, because this is such an important topic for all of us to continue to explore. And generative AI have many, many conversations, and I'm also grateful to see our partners, specifically UC Berkeley, Meredith Lee's here, also being part of the panel, was as a part of the executive order that the governors have issued to really encourage the state of California to continue to explore while taking a very measurable steps towards the utilization of generative AI. And today's topic is one of those we're going to be part of the thinking to see how do we use generative AI to really help the state in general in preparedness, in whether you call it in disaster response or disaster resilience, planning, however, all of the things we can do in dealing with this inevitable change that we're all facing. And coming back to the executive order specifically, knowing some of these activities would have already gone, in a very much a planning effort, we're really trying to see how would the utilization of generative AI would accelerate that, or would it actually cause other harms that we may or may not know? And that is the measured approach that we're taking. Every day we wake up, on one hand, we're quite excited about what generative AI can bring, but on the other hand, we also have this uncertainty, sometimes even lead to fear, I'll say it, of the unknowns. And that's why through conversations such as this, through the steps that are laid out in the executive order, the state is really, really wanting to roll up our sleeves, not only to understand all of the academic research, the industry feedback, and our partners in the community was telling us, but really, really rolling our sleeve and trying to do pilots or proof of concept of our own. And by doing so, it's the best way to learn, to really, really experience what this technology can bring. And that's what we're trying to focusing on. And at the end of the day, for the state of California, with 35 of the 50 generative AI companies headquartered in California, we wanted to create an environment where innovation and creativity are celebrated. At the same time, we're also looking for every measures that we can do to provide the necessary guardrail so that we are responsibly using this brand new technology. And maybe just to close out, to give you a little bit of a glimpse of what are the 5 pilots already in progress, in addition to the Natural Resource Agency. I know that CAL FIRE, prior to this, have also announced that they have utilized AI as a way of, in their wildfire effort. The 5 initiatives or the 5 pilots the state have already embarked on, 2 of them are related to health and care services, dealing with language access. The other one is facility inspection, really looking at not necessarily at anything that are interfacing with the residents at the moment, aside from the language access, but what can state do utilize generative AI as a way of streamlining our back office effort, which translate to higher throughput and higher capacity in the way that we do and inspecting and getting this facility ready. So that's the 2 from Health and Human Services Agency. In the sales and use tax, we applied a proof of concept on a very open topic of call center. People think about, well, call center, that's a very mature technology contact center. There's, multiple channels, there's omni-channel, you can do that. But why are you also exploring generative AI on top of that? Well, guess what? With all of the residents calling for help, what are the typical type of question that is raised? And what are the typical answer and the time of those answers are being addressed? Through that learning, what are, again, the type of knowledge-based departments such as California Department of Tax and Fee can create to further assist their call agent to better service our residents. And that is really coming from an angle of how the state can continue to improve our customer service to our residents. The last two are transportation related, which I'm actually most excited about. And they're related to traffic management flow and how to find a way to see if we can reduce the number of hours, I'm literally using the hours people spend on highway, by more strategically designed or direct traffic as these traffic situation creates, either by themselves or due to a natural disaster as what we're facing right now. And then the last of the five, to me, it's very, very important, is we saw a unwelcoming trend that the number of fatality for those that are not in the car, but on the road, such as a pedestrian, bicyclist, or people on a motorcycle, are unfortunately increasing, 12 a day. And that is not a good trend to have. And that is due to many of the fact that our roads are becoming more busy, more distracted drivers on the road, and during the pandemic time, folks were driving very fast because they felt the road was more open. Well, now there's more cars on the road, that the pace or their driving behavior hasn't changed. So we're trying to find a way to how to use generative AI to do, whether it's a different signage or different traffic light or different education, different awareness, to how do we improve the road safety for those individuals who are not in the car. So those combination are the first five. The state is putting it on the street and asking for innovative idea. And I'm sure after today's conversation and this entire week of a conversation on disaster resilience, there are probably more ideas we continue to explore to see how California could play a role in utilizing generative AI in a much, much more creative, innovative way. So without further ado, I think I'll just leave it at that and wish you all a wonderful, wonderful conference this morning, and looking forward to engage with you all more. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Tong, for your remarks and also for your leadership in our state regarding the opportunities and uncertainties of using AI, not just for disaster resilience, but for the many piloted projects that we're already thinking about here in California. So I'd like to get us going by introducing Jenn Phillips, our moderator for today's panel discussion. Jenn is currently serving as the Assistant Secretary for Climate Change at the California Natural Resources Agency. Jenn plays a pivotal role in guiding the agency's initiatives on climate adaptation, nature-based solutions, and international engagement. Her wealth of experience includes serving as a senior policy advisor with the U.S. Climate Alliance, where Jenn provided invaluable support to a bipartisan coalition of U.S. states on resilience and natural and working land policy priorities. Her dedication to climate resilience further extends to her prior roles with the California Governor's Office of Planning and Research, OPR, and the California Ocean Protection Council, OPC. With her extensive background in climate policy and natural resource management, Jenn Phillips brings a unique perspective to today's discussion. Thank you for joining us, Jenn.
There we go. Thank you very much, Sarah. And thanks for making the trek today. I know the weather's a bit tough for all of us. This is obviously such an important topic for all of us to be digging into today. So really grateful for CCST bringing this to the forefront. We have a short amount of time and I really want to dig into it, but I want to start with one thought. As many of you know, the New York Times does its sort of end of year reflections. And this really stuck with me as I was thinking about this conversation today. They say, if 2023 was the year the world woke up to AI, 2024 might be the year in which its legal and technical limits will be tested. So that's something for us to think about as I invite my panelists up to the stage and we have a exciting conversation for 20-25 minutes. I'd first like to introduce and invite up to the stage Assemblymember Rebecca Bauer-Kahan. She is representing California's 16th Assembly District and chair of the Committee on Privacy and Consumer Protection. Next panelist is Kate Dargan. Kate is the former state fire marshal and senior advisor for wildfire resilience at the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. Our next panelist is Dave Korsmeyer. He serves as Deputy Center Director for Research and Technology at the NASA Ames Laboratory. And last but not least, Meredith Lee. She serves as Head of Strategic Partnerships and Chief Technical Advisor to the Dean in the College of Computing, Data Science, and Society at UC Berkeley. Yes, thank you. So I'm so grateful to have you all on the stage, and I don't want to take up too much airtime, so I would love to just dive right into it and hear from each of you, maybe going down the line, you know, a little bit about your background and sort of relevant experience related to this big topic we're digging into today. So, Assemblymember.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. So I am not a technologist, and I own that fact about myself. I did grow up around them. I grew up in Silicon Valley. My dad is a physicist who was a founder at Xerox PARC. So I grew up in the labs where many of these things are invented, but ended up becoming an attorney and started my career as a regulatory lawyer, taught law school, and then ended up here in the California State Assembly. I spent 2 years chairing the Water Parks and Wildlife Committee. So have thought deeply about a lot of these issues as it relates to water, flooding, drought, et cetera. And then recently became the chair of the Privacy and Consumer Protection Committee, really to dive into this issue of AI and how we as a state lead the nation in regulating it, understanding it, and ensuring that we're using it in the ways that it can benefit us and protecting California consumers in the ways they need us to.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Jen. Let's see, I started out as a firefighter for CAL FIRE in 1977, 47 years ago in San Mateo, Santa Cruz. And I've been involved in the wildfire arena for, you know, since then, 47 years ago. And that journey has taken me through a 30-year career at CAL FIRE. Part of that was being appointed the state fire marshal by Governor Schwarzenegger. I worked very hard at that time with what are now considered the Wildland Urban Interface Building Standards. And helped author those. And when I retired from CAL FIRE in 2009, I founded a technology company. So I learned from my firefighting experience how to become a technologist, which was not easy. That was a lot of years of tears and frustration to tackle that. But for the last 13 years, I've been involved at the intersection of wildfire and tech. And that led me to a request and appointment to the White House under the Biden administration for the White House Office of Science and Technology and Policy around wildfire. And that led to this current part of my journey, which is advising the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation on their rollout. This is year one of a 12-year rollout for their Wildfire Resilience Initiative, which is the Western United States, British Columbia, and Alaska, and how to change how we're looking at wildfire and how to build resiliency. So thank you.
Great, thanks. Dave?
So hi, my name is Dave Korsmeyer. I'm from NASA Ames Research Center. I am the resident technologist on the panel today. I have a PhD in applied math, and I've been at NASA Ames, which is down in Silicon Valley at Mountain View, since 1991. I used to run the AI and robotics group there for 10 years after a research career in the same group for another 10 years. Then became director of engineering, and now am the lead research and development architect for NASA Ames. We're about $1 billion of revenue, federal government money, and we do a lot of science and cool stuff.
Great, thank you.
Good morning, Meredith Lee. I am head of strategic partnerships and chief technical advisor to the dean of the brand new College of Computing, Data Science, and Society at UC Berkeley. We are the first new college on campus in more than half a century. I haven't been there for half a century, but I'm really excited about it. I've been working for about 25 years in different aspects of high stakes, data-driven decision-making, whether that has been in the biomedicine and health space as a student. I still identify as a technologist myself, whether that was in Homeland Security, in DC, or water data. I see some water data folks in the audience, good to be home, or education and workforce data. Currently, as Secretary Tong mentioned, my portfolio has a lot of activity at the intersection of data science, human-centered design, and AI, particularly generative AI. And finally, relevant to the topic of disaster resilience, during the Obama administration, I led the White House Innovation for Disaster Response and Recovery Initiative, which was a multi-agency coordinated effort with the Office of Science and Technology Policy, National Security Council, National Science and Technology Council. We have a lot of councils, and data.gov to really, in the wake of Hurricane Sandy, try to empower disaster survivors, first responders, and the broader community with technology and resources so that they can make informed decisions. So it's really heartening to see where things have gone. Back then, we were literally dialing for data, picking up the phone to try to improve situational awareness, but there are still so many gaps to be addressed. And so I'm really grateful for CCST and this group to elevate this really timely and important topic. Thanks for having me.
Great, thank you all. So before we really dig into sort of the theme of today, I thought I'd maybe ask Dave and Meredith and any others that want to chime in, can you tell us a little bit more, give us a bit more grounding in AI? I know this is a softball question, but for those of us in the room that are still sort of getting up to speed, tell us a bit about AI, specifically generative AI, and sort of what have been the big breakthroughs of late.
Sure. I'll give you Dave's version of a thumbnail. So it's not Encyclopedia Brown or anything like that. So there's a lot of different flavors of AI. Everything from your route planning on your phone, Google Maps, Apple Maps, Waze, you tell it how to go from one spot to another. Back in the day, that was really breakthrough AI. It really was. It's called path planning. It's a type of mathematical optimization. All this stuff is really math in the background, right? That's what we're dealing with. And then we're dealing with a lot of data and how to encode that data into math. So there's lots of flavors of different AI out there. The thing that's catching people a little off guard in the past couple of years has been this thing called generative AI. It's not new. It's actually been around for a long time. It's based on some stuff called machine learning, which is a field of math that basically tells you or allows you to figure out how to encode large sets of data, which otherwise would just be lists and lists and lists, sheets and sheets of data that you would otherwise like store in a database. How do you encode that or pack it into a whole set of nested equations? It's done in a kind of very tricky way by what they call training, where you just cram the data through the equation and it changes the little values of the equations in such a way so that when you ask it again, it can regurgitate the data. So you've taken a big wad of data and you've packed it into a bunch of mathematical equations, often a neural net or a different type of a construct. So that's not a problem. We've been using those for years and they're really useful to allow you to find similar things. So you train it on a whole bunch of trees or Shakespeare sonatas, and you then give it another example and it says, yep, that's a tree with 80% accuracy, or that's a Shakespeare sonata with 25% accuracy, because I wrote it. What we figured out recently is how to turn that little mathematical equation over and say, okay, now generate for me what is an average tree, and it'll burp out an average tree. And if it did it in Crayola, we wouldn't be worried about it at all, because we'd say, yeah, that's kind of like an average tree. My 3-year-old can do that. The problem is it generates it at very high fidelity and a really beautiful picture, and with the background and the sunset and squirrels, and we think, gosh, that looks real. It fakes us out. But it's just doing what we trained it to do. It's just the same data. Same thing, if you wanted to generate a Shakespeare sonata, boop, it'll give you something that looks like a Shakespeare sonata. That's not the problem. What's freaking people out about AI these days is we've trained it on we don't know what, sometimes garbage, and sometimes that means garbage in, garbage out. That's where there's a little bit of a concern. These are all tools. There's phenomenal ways we can use these tools to really help us, help our state, help our country, help the world. We just need to figure out how to best use the tools and not do stupid things with them.
Great. Meredith, do you want to add anything about sort of what AI is and the major moments in the fields?
How much time do we have? No.
Yeah.
I think to underscore a few things about what is potentially really deep and meaningful and surprising for our next steps is the speed and fidelity aspect. It's the really prominence of, AI in the headlines, potentially impacting or actually impacting everyday lives. When you think about Californians and the 40 million people in our state, I believe personally, and I think a lot of people at my institution believe, that our strength is in our diversity, right? And we don't know what we don't know. ChatGPT also doesn't know what it doesn't know. But whatever we do in terms of next steps really needs to be grounded in the community and grounded in trust. And so I think there are some really heavy questions being raised, day in and day out about how AI's future and our future mesh and intertwine, and what can we as humans at the center of this actually do about it.
Great, thank you. All right, so I want to now think about some big ideas for AI and disaster resilience. But before I do, I want to let our audience know that there's going to be time for questions at the end. So if any of you have a question right now, just raise your hand and someone from CCST will come over, bring you a note card, and we can ask that later on in this agenda. And for folks on the line, we can just use the Q&A feature for questions. So for all of our panelists, I'm curious to hear from you about, I know we're going to talk a lot about the promise and sort of the trust challenges with this too, but, let's start with the promising opportunities. What do you see as the most promising opportunities that AI presents for enhancing our resilience to disasters? Anyone can go for it.
Sure. So we don't have to lean so far into the mics. Because I'm bringing a wildfire lens to this discussion. I'm a part strategist and part tactician. So I'll talk about operationally, like how we think about using AI in the wildfire space. So first off, we've got to understand we have some big priorities. Traditionally in California and across the country, we've thought the wildfire priority was don't let people in communities die. That was the big deal. Now we're discovering that we also have to make sure ecosystems don't die. And that's getting it a little more complicated with us. And then we're starting to discover that our wildfire suppression model isn't working so well for us. And we're trying to figure out how to turn that into a wildfire opportunity model. And AI is going to help us with all three of those priorities. Can't let communities and people die. Can't let ecosystems die. And to do that, we have to start thinking differently about the suppression, put it all fires out into wildfire opportunities. And that's going to take us some decades to do, but data is going to be one of our crucial tools on how to understand that. And I'll give you some examples later on in the discussion.
So let me build on what Kate mentioned here and pick wildfires as disaster du jour, as opposed to flooding or erosion or earthquakes or anything else. It all applies. We get and generate and can capture a ton of data, right? I work for NASA. There's 25, 26 orbital systems currently operated by NASA alone that are looking down at the Earth, at the climate, at the environment, at the plants, at the rivers, at the oceans, at the land, at the air, and we're just trying to understand how everything works. That's our job. NOAA does the same thing. National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Agency. USGS has some stuff. There's a lot of data out there that tells us how things work. It's really hard to go through that data and find the parts that matter. these cool AI tools allow us to basically go through that data much more easily, find patterns and similarities much more easily. I mean, insanely more easily, such that what otherwise would have been somebody's PhD is a high school student project now. I mean, it's just a ginormous change. And so we can now, theoretically get to the point where we look at the state of California, say, hey, these areas have had wildfires. What's similar about these areas? What's similar about the time of day, the time of year, the climate, the soil moisture, the plant growth, the plant type, the housing, the people, the infrastructure, everything. And we can find similarities. And then we can say, okay, where else in California are similar areas like that? Because we had wildfires here and all this other stuff. Maybe that other stuff means there may be wildfires there. It's correlations. It doesn't mean it's causal, not yet, but it will tell us, are there correlations between the data? That's super powerful. And that will really speed up being able to do things and understand that, look, there's a community that looks just like Paradise, that has the same characteristics. Should we be worried about them? And I think maybe we should. So what do we do about that?
Definitely should.
Right? So that's where I think we can go with these type of tools, and it's just going to be great. We can also do a bunch of other dumb stuff, but that's some good stuff.
Yeah.
And I'll just add briefly, I mean, I think what's so exciting to me and the promise that this holds, look, I live on the wildland urban interface. My entire district is a wildland urban interface. And my fire chief recently showed me the AI he's using to plan evacuation routes and how he'll send text messages slowly to get us out as safely as possible, one way in, one way out in really dangerous areas. So there's so much opportunity. But I think when you go up to the world we live in, which is having to figure out how to spend the tax dollars that we are entrusted with in ways that make the most sense for Californians, the opportunity here to use the data that people like NASA are getting, working in the water space, they're able to see what's underground. They're able to tell us what's being pulled out of the ground. So as we do sustainable groundwater management, how do we do that best? How can the models help us say how we can have more safe, affordable drinking water while keeping our crops alive? Mm-hmm. And I think the opportunity for AI to give us that information and then allow us to make the best possible decisions pretty far out, right? I mean, we are talking about building infrastructure projects at the state level, 10, 20 years, right? And so to know what our water future is in 20 years and be able to start building for that and planning for that in a really accurate and meaningful way, I think will change the way we do business with tax dollars and make them much more effective and meaningful and make us more prepared for the future.
Great. You want to respond, Kate?
I do, because I said I'd bring some examples back, and I wanted to give my colleagues a chance to speak first, but here are some specific examples to kind of build on this. First off, wildfire and water, intimately connected, very connected. And so the ability for AI to bring the water data and the wildfire data together for recognitions about water source, supply, quality, because I have a hypothesis. I'm a deep thinker about these things. I think our wildfire and water connection are going to be profound for us in the decades ahead, and really, have very deep impact on our economy because of our water supply questions in California. But here's some examples for how wildfire. You mentioned your fire chief and the evacuation routing. One of the things that we're investing in on the philanthropic side with the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation is an entirely new way of looking at data models for structural ignition and pathways for how homes burn in the wildland urban interface. Very specific predictions, not just the perimeters of fires, but how fires move into the pathways of communities so that we can start to predict which homes within those communities are more at risk than other homes. Another example is a satellite constellation that we're working with, a low Earth orbit satellite system that is designed to show fires the same way we see rain. Now, we're just going through the flooding system. We've all been looking at radar and satellite imagery all weekend of big bands of moisture moving across California, green, yellow, red, moisture content. We're used to seeing that. We see flooding patterns. What if we saw fire the same way? What if every time we saw a fire moving through our landscape, we were able to see the red, the yellow, the green parts based on fire intensity, where the cool fire part of the fire is and where the super hot part of the fire is. And that's one of the examples that we're working on. That technology is available to us, and we can start to differentiate not just the edges of fire, but think of fire in a grid pattern where you can see what part of the fire is too hot and what part of the fire is actually beneficial. We'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Great. Meredith or Dave, any final thoughts?
To build on what Kate mentioned, I think a nuance here that is really important to keep in mind is that to really have interoperable systems that give us the best answers with what we have, in the moment and so forth, there really isn't a single organization, sector, discipline that has all of the different pieces. And so when we look moving forward to actually advance the capabilities, it has to be in partnership. It has to be very thoughtful and strategic about the interplay and the mechanisms across different stakeholders.
And I'll just say, last thought on this, building on your idea, the idea of having future tools and models that would allow you to have a really good fire prediction across the state. So as you get your weather prediction for, next Wednesday, it also says, well, in these regions have, high incidence of fire, and here's a heat map, a little color map of where it's going to be safe or not safe. Same thing for any potential natural environment change, be it, the tides, the weather, fire season, earthquakes. You can get to the point where we'll have enough data that we can make a reasoned assumption about you should watch out for these things. So, if you're in this area, make sure you cut back your foliage because it's in that season. Be careful. And those will be great tools.
Great. Thank you. So as suspected, we're already talking a lot about wildfires and how AI can be an important tool. We're also talking a lot about sort of the preparedness and response side of disaster. So I'm curious to hear from some of you all as we think about disaster resilience in California coming off a weekend of flooding. How do we expand this use and application of AI to other disasters? What about flooding? What about heat and drought? And also, how do we think about sort of the full disaster spectrum from preparedness through recovery as we're thinking about the use and capability of AI?
Okay, I'll just dive right into that one. Sorry, and shut me up if you need to, please. Easy thing. Right, I drove through some low-lying roads on my way up to Sacramento. A little bit of water in there. That's easy data. We know where that data is. We know where the roads are. We know where there's gullies. We know where there's drains or no drains. We know where there's been past flooding. You can capture all of that information. Instead of having in a list where somebody would have to look it up and it may be time-consuming, you can actually train one of these more advanced models, these Gen AI models, to say, where is it likely if I get 2 inches of rain and I see what's coming from the radar on the weather coming in, if I get this rain coming in, where am I going to have a problem? And give you, again, a little map of these are the likely areas. Stay away. Don't drive there. And feed that to the Apple, Google Waze, pick your map, and they'll route you around it. There's simple things we can do, very low-hanging fruit things that we can do that are very achievable these days.
Great. Any other thoughts on expanding beyond wildfire or how wildfire, Kate, I know you think a lot about this, how wildfire can help spur ideas in other sort of disaster contexts?
Sure, but I'll wait because I see you.
No, you can go ahead. I was just going to add on to the water piece. So a colleague from Los Angeles told us last week she had a constituent who lived in an urban part of LA, bought a home, did not think or have any way of knowing she was in a floodplain. Last year, she lost her home. She didn't have flood insurance. And I feel like these are the examples of places where our lack of information, our lack of ability to predict is causing real problems in real Californians' lives, and that this can shift that dynamic, right? The using the information at our fingertips and putting it into these models that we can actually protect Californians and notify them you should have flood insurance or that you're in a high-risk area, you're taking on higher risk. And we don't have that today, but I think we can get there.
Yeah, I'll add on, I mentioned that I founded a software company, co-founded, and it was really designed for all emergency, not just wildfire. And we built situational awareness, common operating platforms for fire agencies to bring in all of these different disasters. And we call it the full planning cycle. So it is in firefighter speak and military speak, it's right of bang and left of bang. Left of bang is what we do ahead of the incident. Right of bang is what we do afterwards. On the recovery side, which is crucial, I'll go back to a little bit of the ecosystem bit, as well as the human infrastructure that we have. We don't yet know how communities respond well in terms of their recovery. We don't know yet what makes a community recover faster and better. And AI data will help tell us some of that. It's partly the economics, it's partly the social structures, and it's partly the community behavior writ large, as well as the physical, environmental, natural conditions. Those are things that we haven't even yet assembled in models yet. We don't really have that data combined yet to give us demographics, behavioral, and physical conditions. That's where we could make advances in AI these days to our benefit. But I also want to call out, as well as other types of disasters, and I do think, well, I'm just going to hold it there so we have time. Thank you.
That's a great segue. I want to maybe turn to the Assembly member and also you, Meredith. You know, we're thinking a lot about, you know, the promising elements of AI, but Kate, as you said, you know, when we think about socioeconomic factors and recovery, that brings in some questions around trust and safety. So how do we strike a balance between safety and innovation and wanting to be at the forefront of innovation in California? And where should we really proceed with caution while being at that forefront? And what are the risks that we need to start thinking for as we prepare for, you know, more use of AI and more applications?
Well, I think privacy. I think we as the government stewards, so I speak for myself, have to really own the fact that people trust us with their data in a way that they hopefully can, that they don't trust private companies who want to monetize their data and sell it. And so when we take in that data, and we have a lot of very private data, and some of the things we're talking about, even in the firefighting space, which is incredible, these cameras that are putting out to predict and tell us when fires are happening, can capture really private, intimate things about people. And I think it's really, really critical that we own our role in ensuring that the privacy of that data remains intact, that we are not sharing it with public entities that are, you know, companies that are going to monetize it, sell it, and do things with it that the consumer wouldn't want it to, when allowing the state of California to have that data and use it to their benefit. So that's really critical. And I think, you know, as the secretary was speaking earlier about the new proposals, one of the things that we are really thinking about in the legislature is how do we ensure that as we start to partner with folks to do generative AI with California's data, that we're protecting it. Because I had a private company walk into me and say, you know, if you gave us all of California's data, we could really get our model up to speed fast. Yes, you could. And no, I'm not going to do that, right? So we have a role here as it relates to privacy. I also think something we've been thinking a lot about is bias, right? You know, garbage in, garbage out. And we know that historically we have not cared for all communities in the same way. Talk about floodplains, talk about the way people were affected by the floods last year. Or communities of color in the Central Valley were hit much harder because their infrastructure was not built up the way others were. And so as we build out these models, we need to be watching really closely to ensure that those biases are not being built into the models and perpetuating historical wrongs, that we're moving forward with a future that protects those communities just as much as others.
What's often missing from the headlines is really the disproportionate impacts, the long tail of recovery, and what that looks like for different communities across our state and across other regions. And so I appreciate us raising this point and really underscoring that there are cascading and then often compounding disasters upon disasters when it comes down to it. And we know this as Californians, from fires, from floods, from the pandemic, from housing insecurity, lack of access to safe drinking water. And it really is upon us to try to work together for solutions that leverage the, you know, trust that we should expect from public institutions. I always fall back to the example from some of the folks in this audience with the water data community. When AB 1755, the Open and Transparent Water Data Act, happened, we got into rooms and we rolled up our sleeves, like Secretary Tong said, and we asked who needs what data, potentially in what format, to make what decision. Fondly, the who, what question. And you have to be persistent in asking about those use cases to really try to move the needle. I would add for the disaster scenario topic, and then also with the potential power of AI, we really need to be very clear on what are the stakes, what are the impacts, and are there implications down the line that you can't actually reverse based on what we're deciding now. So it takes, as Secretary Tong said, a very measured approach where you're balancing the potential huge upsides with things that really are keeping us up at night and giving us a lot of white hair.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we're short on time, so I'm going to ask the last question, and 10 words or less, if possible. If you could dream without constraints, what's the most audacious application of AI for disaster resilience in California that you might envision? And dream big here. I know that we've talked about some privacy and trust things, but what could we do? First
okay. 10 words or less. California state government advisory tools trained on good canonical data. 10 words or less.
Succinct. That was good.
Excellent. I'll try. I don't know if I can get to that. Yeah. So my vision, hope, dream is that we leverage AI to substantially change how we approach wildfire. We need to have more fire, not less. We need it to be cool fire.
Great.
Data-driven leaders with human perspective and purpose.
I want to be able to predict earthquakes days in advance.
Great. Adding another element to our disaster. Yep. All right. So I think at this point, we're going to take a short 10-minute break. So this first one is great and one I wanted to ask you all. So what should be the role of state and federal government to support the build out and maintenance of our spatial data infrastructure to feed into AI models?
All right, I'll take a first whack at it. So there is a build out happening. It is not perhaps as coordinated as it should be. Let's be candid, right? It's happening at government level all the way from, I would say, probably city all the way up to federal. And then there's, international efforts to do that. So I think we need to coordinate it better. We need to be open about what we're trying to do. One of the things that Dave here personally is a fan of is the government doing things that are foundational and like being the canonical place where we have really good data is a good example of something the government can do, and I think the federal government does, and NASA actively tries to do for the data we manage and gather. And that may be something we do going forward in the future as we get more and more of these models, or we get third parties, nonprofits, NGOs, private industries gathering and generating data that otherwise used to be done only by the federal or state or local governments. We still would be the template upon which you'd say, no, I don't know where they're getting that data. It doesn't match the canonical data. And then we can have an argument if we get there, but people need to know what's real and what's not.
Great. Would love to hear other thoughts on the data side, on the role of state and federal government, but also just more broadly, the role of state and federal governments in this space too.
Yeah, I want to give time for you, Meredith, if you have an answer.
I'm just going to let the .gov
Okay.
go first.
Okay. Yeah. So one is I see some gaps out there because of how and who I work with, local, state, and federal agencies. And one is, we don't have a good policy structure that directs agencies to produce structured data in ways that we can release to the public. There's a good amount of data information that government holds that is private and should never be shared out, but there's a far greater amount that should be. And having a framework for our agencies, both directed and then the framework structure for that data, and it should be consistent in California across all of our agencies, would be very helpful. And the other is on the privacy side. We don't tend to approach it in the wildfire space from a policy standpoint for what data is sensitive, what's shareable, and what should be public. And I'll just use wildfire evacuation information as an example. We don't have a policy on how fast that should get to the public. And that would be one place we could start.
So don't get me started about government silos or we'll be here all day. So when I took over the water committee, I started to study water, and the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was sort of just in its final rollout. And so I said, okay, how do we know what water is underground? How do we know how we're managing this? And I meet with Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and they're doing flyovers, and I meet with NASA, and they've got satellites, and nobody's talking to anybody else, but they all have data about what's underground. And I thought, this is insane. I come out of the private sector where you wouldn't do that. You would not have separate labs doing the same thing and not even talking to each other. So we need to do a much better job. And obviously that was federal and we're state. And how do we leverage the data they have and vice versa? And I think we could do a much, much better job. And we need to work to do that because it's so critical that we know what's going on in order to solve these critical problems that we face with climate change. I think we talked about trust. And I want to say that I think in all of this, and especially as it relates to disaster response, one of our primary, if not our primary objective as the government, is to keep our communities safe, right? And that's what we're here to talk about. And they need to trust us to do that, right? And so how do we get them to trust us? And do I want the federal government to be taking the lead there? Yes, because I think that that is better for the nation. Are they? No. I'm just going to be real about it. We have the strongest privacy laws in the nation, and they are working every year to roll that back in Washington, to create preemption and pass a less protective privacy law. So that's what's happening in Washington. So what does that mean for us here in California? It means that we really need to own that role as it relates to AI. We need to own the role of building the trust and the security in our communities, that we are going to be responsible with their data, that we're going to build responsible models, that they feel safe in how these AI tools are being deployed in their communities. And then at the end of the day, when something happens, be it a flood, a wildfire, that we've got their backs and we have the tools to do it. And so I do think that we cannot rely on the federal government to do that because we haven't seen them lead in that regard.
Totally agree with RBK on the silos of excellence that are pervasive. I will say last week, the announcement about regional innovation engines was really exciting. It starts with $150 million of NSF funding, but the thing that you should highlight when you're reading the announcement is that it was matched nearly 2-to-1 from local and state government, from philanthropy, from private sector partners. And I was saying, I don't think I recall ever seeing something like this. And then a few lines later, it says, oh, this actually, if you look at 1.6 billion over the next 10 years, it is very well one of the largest single investments in R&D that's place-based in our nation's history. And so asking, like, how can we actually combine forces? And, not that all the silos need to merge and be like one big silo, but where can we leverage our unique strengths and assets very strategically to collectively get a larger sum than just the parts?
Great, thanks so much. All right, next audience question, which is another theme we've touched on about sort of what goes in and what comes out and the sort of validation side of this. Is anyone working on ways of evaluating the data that goes into these AI models or setting standards for the data that gets used?
Yes and no. So yes, on the government side and the academic side, but on the private industry side, there's no constraints, right? So if you, pre-generative AI, if you said, I'm a private company and I have a database on all the great places to get my great food, pick any number of websites out there that actually do this. But you didn't tell anybody where you got that data from. You didn't say whether you actually went to the place to find out if the food was good or actually eat there, but maybe you made it up. Would people trust that data? No, they wouldn't go to that site. It wouldn't make any sense. That's where we are right now with some of these tools. We don't know what went into it. We don't know if anybody ever went to the store and tried the food. So why trust it? That's why the government, academia, and others are trying to get to trusted data sets, because once you train it on trusted data, the likelihood of it giving you a good answer is so much better, right? So yes and no.
You know, we are just starting to figure out how to regulate this. There is no question about that. And this question really comes, I think, to one of the hardest questions we have, which is, do we regulate the inputs or the outputs, right? And I think that one of the things that I personally truly believe about all of these AI tools that are so critically important is that we need to let the innovation space flourish, because competition is the healthiest thing for our market. And so how do we regulate while allowing competition to flourish so that we don't just have the big players winning? We're seeing in other spaces that's so dangerous to our society. And so regulate in a way that allows for competition to thrive, but also protects us. And as you think about regulating inputs, then you have a real trade secret question, right? Because how they train these tools is part of the magic of what they have. I call it magic because I'm not a technologist, but you know, and so I do think this is what I think we are struggling with at the core foundation of how do we regulate this? Is it the inputs? Is it the outputs? Do we want, you know, I wrote a bill that focuses on impact assessment. So I'm not regulating how you train it, but I'm making sure you test it before you deploy it, right? And that's an output question. So I don't know that we have the answers, but we are working incredibly hard to talk to the people and work with the people who I think can guide us in passing the smartest regulations in the country to make sure we're thinking about this in a good way. But part of what I guess I wanted to say to all of you is you are a part of that. I mean, our scientists and our technologists, I'm not one, I owned that from the very first moment, are critical in helping guide the policy and the regulation that comes forward. And so we've got to be in relationship and in conversation to get this right.
I only want to add one piece to this, and that is yes to all of this. And I advocate that government has a charge for protecting life, environment, property, and the good of its citizens at every level. If you want to do business with that government for the protection of those same values, you should be in a different relationship structurally with government if you're providing the data to do that. So I think there's room for us to have a higher standard for the companies that we partner with than we do for companies that just sell voluntary products on the open market where people have a choice. They don't have a choice about how they get protected. So I advocate for a different level of standard for them.
Great. All right, this is an interesting question. We haven't talked too much about sort of how does this guide our investments and our prioritization of dollars, but do you think AI should help guide hazard mitigation investments, seismic retrofits, to your point earlier, wildfire mitigation, and so on and so forth?
I always seem to be the first one to talk. I apologize. It should guide in the sense that a spreadsheet of data should guide some decision maker making a decision. It should not make the decision. Never let AI make a decision for you. That's a poor choice. Look at where your map app is taking you and don't just blindly follow it as a general rule. So that should hold true for everything.
And I'll say as the one who gets to vote on the state budget. So I think that I really believe in data-driven decisions, especially as it relates to the way we spend our tax dollars. And can AI be a powerful part of that? Yes, but I think the point is absolutely right that it should be making those decisions. And I also think it's early for, you know, generative AI to be a part of that. We need to trust it before we can allow it to guide us, right? But do I believe that down the line, it can provide us with the data to do so? Yes, and today we do rely on data, right? I mean, one of the things as we were looking last year in partnership with the administration on how we spent our water dollars was the predictions that were coming out of Lawrence Berkeley Lab of what was going to happen to our water in the future, right? So that data is driving our decisions today, and I think more of that is going to happen through AI in the future, but I think it's a little early.
Great. And maybe I'll ask one more audience question, unless there's any online. Keep going. Okay. So we've talked about a couple different types of data. We've talked about the data that we collect to understand the problems related to fire, flooding, but then we talk about the other data we get about the people and the other information from maybe those cameras that you were talking about. So what safeguards should we really be putting in place, or how should we be thinking about this so that we mitigate those challenges? Yeah, so I think the question is asking a lot about, there's the data that you're trying to collect. Let's take Alert California. You have the camera shots, but then there's the other data, the data about people, or the data that we weren't trying to collect that could be put out there. So what safeguards should we put in place to really be mitigating this?
Yeah, I mean, one of the foundational principles of California's right to privacy right now is the right to delete. That's basically, as I understand it, impossible once it gets fed into some of these models, right? So we are in a new landscape where some of the things that we have already said to Californians they have a right to as it relates to their privacy may not be true in the future, right? Which is why as we look at these RFPs going out, we need to be really careful how our data goes into these models because they don't come out. And so, I think it is really critical that we think deeply about how these models are built, what they do with the data, and how we protect it. And some of this is the most intimate data of your life. I mean, if you think about disaster response, someone loses a home and they need our help and they come to get FEMA response and get the support of their county, and they're giving us details about their home and their private lives that we use to help them. What happens to that data? And in the current world, it's protected and you can even delete it if you want to down the line. And so as we build that into models, we need to make sure we're doing it in a way that is as protective as possible while, not going over the line to help innovation, because I think privacy needs to be balanced.
And this kind of connects to why I was advocating for relationships of trust with the companies that we partner with for these very important reasons. So there are ways that we can mask out portions of inadvertently collected data with the trusted agents that we purchase information from or partner with to create it. But I've thought a lot about this. It's come up for years now in the wildfire space because we're trying to make property safer, homes and the yards or landscapes around them safer, as distinguished from the individuals that live within them. So in our models, in our framework of thinking about this, land in and of itself is less private than the individuals within the home. And so we have very stringent privacy rules for medical protection or things that protect you as an individual, but maybe a lot less for the land that you occupy or own. We have a lot of public data out there in assessors' databases about what you own, how much it costs, what your tax structure is. And for like damage assessment and wildfire, we can release that information probably a lot earlier because it's already in the public space, as opposed to impact to an individual person that would be less shareable. And so there's these nuances that we can play with.
One quick thing. Something to consider, the models that are being generated, they're just math. So we could throw it away. If it's got bad data in it, just throw it away. It's going to cost somebody to regenerate it again, but they're not works of art. They're not Ming vases. They're just data compression tools. So throw it away if it's got the bad data in it. If you need to legislate, dare I say, I'm speaking out of turn here, but if you need to legislate that if data is in there that it shouldn't be in there, don't make them mask it, make them throw it away. And then they'll learn that the cost of putting bad data in is exceedingly high, so they won't put bad data in. They're not there for all time. ChatGPT was just a demo. Guess what? It got loose and everybody thinks it's the answer. It's not. It's just a cool demos that some cool people did and are playing around with it, but it's garbage in, garbage out.
Okay, we have one question online, I think.
Yes, thank you. And just a note, we've been getting a number of questions online and we're combining questions to make sure that the topics get covered. So one question that we do have is, as state entities are thinking about how to share data, how can they also be keeping abreast of the rapid changes or improvements in data and models?
They can do that by working with interns, with fellows, having partnerships. You don't have to do it all yourself or all alone. That only would reinforce more silos. And so I think one of the really exciting developments is when you're able to bring in fresh perspectives. And we're seeing this a lot at Berkeley and with our fellow UCs, the CSUs that we work with, the California community colleges. There's such an interest, this real unprecedented interest for not only the science and the technology aspects, but the broader implications, the other disciplines, sociology, economics, business. And so it's a whole new landscape when you are starting to get contributors who are really embracing the multidisciplinary nature of the work. So that's a start. And I see a lot of faces in the room who I know are actively involved. So thank you for bringing in those fellows and interns and more.
Yeah, and I'm stating the obvious, but as a state agency person, I mean, there's so many great cross-agency, cross-department working groups on data and research. So if you have ideas, if you want to get involved, reach out to someone because I'm sure they're involved. And also making sure that you're sharing those updates with your colleagues. I think sometimes we assume we all know what the other person's working on, but there's too much work to go around. So we really need to make sure we're bringing these updates and the innovation to the forefront in each of these, regular agency working group conversations. Okay, I think we're sort of out of time here. Oh, I have 1 minute left, so we're going to close. I've already asked you the big, audacious question, so now I'm curious to hear from each of you anything that you didn't cover, any last points or takeaways you want to share with our audience in the room and online.
I think it actually goes with that last question, which is, I think one of the major limiting factors of government in this new landscape is the inability to bring in the talent that truly understands and can help guide us. And I think CCST is critical in that. We're lucky to have a science fellow this year who is going to help guide us. We're leveraging the talent at OSTP, at the Office of Science, Technology Policy at the White House, because they can bring in amazing talent that's worked in AI. But it's going to be hard. We can't pay what OpenAI is paying or Microsoft is paying right now. And so we do have to leverage whatever talent we can get our hands on to help guide us and for us to learn from. And I'm just like a little baby as it relates to learning about AI. But the folks at Berkeley are key to this, NASA, et cetera. But so is everyone in this room. And so I guess that's what I wanted to leave on, which is we need the talent to do the work that needs to be done here. And so hopefully we have partners in the room who will help us do that.
I think my close is to acknowledge Gordon Moore, the founder of Intel and the founder of the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. And one of his key sayings, which is, if everything you try works, you aren't trying hard enough. So we should accept that. This is a tough road.
And it's going to continue. Last year's super cool AI is 10 years from now, boring old app on your iPhone. So the next generation is always coming. This will always be, we'll always come up with the next cool tools, and we just always need to be cautious, thoughtful, and forward-leaning when we try to figure out how and best to use them.
Since we're here at CNRA, I have to go back to, this is a blue sky panel. There's an amazing opportunity, but the sky is connected to the earth and the ground and the roots. And so let's figure out a way so that we can close some of those gaps and really have a better ecosystem, pun intended.
Well, thank you. Those are amazing closing thoughts and a lot for us to think on. So thanks to my panelists. This was a great conversation, and thank you all for participating in your great questions.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you, of course, to everybody here in person and on Zoom today for all of your questions. Feel free to filter past. It's no problem. Really, seriously, feel free. Yeah. Really. We're just trying to do it all at once here. You know, we're being efficient with our time here. So thank you so much. I think that was just the type of conversation we needed, with a range of expertise, not just on the stage, but in the room, online. Like the panelists said, we can't, chart this path alone. I think one of the key takeaways that came up is, how do we leverage AI to help mitigate the long disaster recovery tail that many of our disadvantaged communities experience? So what opportunities will AI present to really help the state and other actors help these communities get through these cascading, compounding disasters that we see? I also want to say, to do that, I think Meredith had one line that I wrote down word for word here because it was so good. We need data-driven leaders with human-centered perspective and purpose. I just think that really says it all. So thank you. And now I have the pleasure of introducing Secretary Crowfoot here today. He's going to provide some closing remarks for us. We all know the Secretary is an incredibly dedicated public servant, leading the charge in California to steward natural resources. He brings a wealth of experience, a passion for environmental conservation, and a commitment to ensuring the resilience of our state in the face of our evolving challenges. So please help me welcome Secretary Crowfoot.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be with you today. And I think today is really an appropriate moment to reflect on the potential of technology, the potential of partnerships, the potential of artificial intelligence to help us confront the challenges we face in California and the world. I caught the back half of the panel because I was upstairs coordinating with our State Operations Center, given that California, and particularly Southern California right now, is experiencing an intense atmospheric river storm. Parts of greater Los Angeles have now received over 10 inches of rain in the last 24 hours, with more on the way. It's worth noting that in that coordination, which included pre-positioning over 8,000 people and myriad assets and equipment, it was actually technology, modeling, I'll say artificial intelligence, that guided these decisions. We're one of the only states in the United States with a state climatologist, a man named Dr. Mike Anderson, that works out of headquarters here. And he's duo-hatted with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, at the federal level, and our Department of Water Resources. And he collaborates very closely with federally funded research institutions, including Scripps Oceanography Institute, if I'm saying that right, and actually modeling out these big atmospheric rivers that we can now predict with days' notice. And it's that highly sophisticated modeling that's helping our emergency responders actually pre-position people to save lives and property. So I think a really great example of what's already underway to protect California, people and nature, from the impacts of climate change. This need has never been greater, whether it's wildfire, it's flood, it's drought, it's extreme heat, it's sea level rise. California is on the front lines of climate change, much like Mediterranean climates around the world. So the need to optimize technology to build our resilience, I think, is that sort of problem statement, or that need, is very, very clear. I think the opportunity is tremendous in California. Not only do we have state leaders like the Assemblymember, like the governor, that understand the imperative to actually apply this technology, but we have the world's most sophisticated institutions, our federally funded research facilities, the University of California, the CSUs. We have among the best minds in the world to actually help us tackle these challenges and build our resilience. And in doing so, we can be a model for the rest of the world. So I think the problem's never been more acute, but the opportunity, I think, is really unique in California. And it's why I'm so thankful for CCST for leaning into this partnership. I think this is the second or third official Science and Technology Week in Sacramento. And I'm with the Assemblymember. I think we don't know enough in state government about the incredible work that's happening across institutions in California. And we have to continue to improve our ability to matchmake between the resource managers, the policymakers, the decision makers, like those within our agency, and then the great minds doing work across California. I think that there are a ton of unrealized opportunities, but we're making progress. And I think, as you talked about in your panel, the work on wildfire response and wildfire resilience is a really good indication of that. When Governor Newsom took office, his second or third day, he issued an executive order that was in the wake of the Camp Fire that destroyed parts of Paradise and the most damaging fire in California as it relates to loss of lives. So among other things, in that first week, he issued a directive to Cal Fire to pursue what he calls a technology sprint, to shake up our colleagues at Cal Fire and direct them to consider bringing in more technology to wildfire response. And Cal Fire has led in the last 5 years in remarkable ways in partnership with those great minds across California. And as a result, Cal Fire was recognized by Time Magazine as one of the 100 Innovators of the Year, which you may have heard, in partnership with those academic and research institutions that had developed this AI component for wildfire response. From my perspective, it was the sectoral focus of a state and federal agency too, with the U.S. Forest Service, philanthropy, Thank You More Foundation, really goosing this along, but then these academic and research institutions developing these products. And the marriage of all of those players, their collaboration now leads us 5 years on to having artificial intelligence deployed, which has kept potentially catastrophic wildfires limited, and is one reason why over the last couple of wildfire seasons, we've had fairly limited damage. So to me, that's a really good indication of the progress we've made. We can certainly do more in the wildfire space, but I'll suggest we can do a whole lot more to address flood, to build our resilience to drought, sea level rise. We just issued our first sea level rise guidance, scientific guidance in 5 years. So many applications. Extreme heat. We want to be a world leader in actually notifying and keeping communities safe from extreme heat. And so artificial intelligence applications that can provide ubiquitous notification of incoming heat waves and threats like that. I mean, so much potential. I guess I would say lastly, with artificial intelligence, I think we all have a responsibility to demystify what that means and to demonstrate how it can work. I'm not a scientist, so I encounter the term artificial intelligence a bit like I encountered the term blockchain, which is, what is that? I don't get it. And I think a lot of Californians, a lot of Americans might be thinking the same about artificial intelligence. We have our policymakers, our state leaders, vigilant to ensure that the use of data, the use of artificial intelligence doesn't have a negative impact on Californians. But I think we can all explain how what we're terming artificial intelligence is having a positive impact on California. And I think about it as just the most advanced technology we can apply to improve our lives and build our resilience to all of these changes. So as we leave today, I think just know that between Secretary Tong at the beginning of this panel, hopefully you heard from the panelists, and then me closing it out, the appetite that this state government has to partner with the best minds at artificial intelligence is great. Governor Newsom has been directive with agency secretaries to explore opportunities to deploy artificial intelligence. So I'm hopeful that in coming months, years, we'll have specific examples to point to. And lastly, I would say, if you're watching here today in the auditorium or online and you have practical applications where the work that you're doing can actually impact decision-making, bring them to us. So many of us are nose to the grindstone in these jobs, doing the work and responding to all of the challenges we have, like this atmospheric river. And so we need institutions knocking on our door, identifying ways that we can partner, pilots. And I'm with the comments that were made, the imperative is not 100% success. We need to experiment. We need to expand pilots and understand what works and then go from there. So huge thanks for participating today. Best of luck to CCST as you roll out your Science and Technology Week. I'm looking forward to shared success in the future. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. So that is a wrap for today. Thank you again for joining us. CCST is working with our network of experts to, dive into some of these big questions. So you have questions that weren't answered today. You have partnership ideas. We'd love to talk. We have future events this week. We'd love to see you. We can talk more about AI there. I think the schedule is up on the screen here. So the next one is tomorrow's Science and Technology Week reception. We'd love to see you there. So thank you so much. And if you're joining some of our experts for a deeper conversation, you can head on upstairs after this. Thank you.